A lot has happened in the last week. There was a 2-day summit of the North Atlantic Alliance in the Netherlands with a shortened program. The main guest of the event was Donald Trump. He made many statements, including noting that he met with Zelenskyy and called the meeting productive. He also expressed readiness to provide missiles for Patriot systems and accused Putin of continuing Russia's war against Ukraine. In addition, Turkish President Erdogan offered a mediation mission. Mr. Yunus, what are your impressions of Trump's speech, his statements, and most importantly, can his words from these 2 days be trusted? As usual, we meet on the air once a week. I will break your question into blocks. I will start with what preceded the NATO summit and the conclusions that can be drawn directly or between the lines. There is a reason this summit is called the Trump Summit. This was evident as early as the G7 meeting, which was organized to avoid scandals and demonstrate the existence of form. As I often say, according to Plato, form is important, and they tried to keep it, even without deep content. The G7 was organized in this way, and the NATO summit was similarly organized. The form seems to have been followed. The G7 exists. The general mood is positive. The reviews are good. Trump's sudden departure was linked by many to the Middle East conflict, the war between Israel and Iran, and I have already commented on the failed meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump in Canada on the air. It's no big deal, and most likely their meeting will take place at the NATO summit in The Hague.
Без всякого, так сказать, хорошего наполнения содержания. Да? Вот G7 так прошло. И, в принципе, точно так же прошел нынешний саммит НАТО. И вроде бы форма сохранена, G7 существует, позитив, все отозвались очень хорошо. Вот, и внезапный отъезд Дональда Трампа все связали с ближневосточным конфликтом, войной между Израилем и Ираном. Вот, и то, что не состоялась встреча Зеленского и Трампа в Канаде, я вам как раз-таки в эфире вам говорил, что ничего здесь страшного нету, наверняка они встретятся именно на саммите НАТО в Гааге.
That's exactly what happened. I'll tell you right away how I see it. It's important to remind viewers of the Oval Office scandal and the path that Donald Trump and President Zelensky's relationship has taken since then. Remember how before Zelenskyy behaved there from the first day Trump became president, Tim Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Scholz, later Friedrich Merz. It seems that the same tactic is now being followed by Zelenskyy. If we add to this the leaders of the G7 countries gathered around Trump, as well as the participants of the current NATO summit, among whom there were even more politicians, it becomes evident that everyone is acting according to the same model. As they say in Azerbaijan, everyone is trying to put watermelons under his armpits.
Куда уже добавилось намного большее количество политических лидеров. Вот. И мы видим, что все, в принципе, придерживаются этой тактики. Все, как у меня в Азербайджане любят говорить, подбрасывают ему под мышки арбузы.
And this tactic seems to work very well. And in this way, the topic of scandal seems to disappear, and there is a form of positive, and sometimes even in some rhetorical phrases that we want to hear. And the average person wants to hear good words in the first place because he thinks that if he hears these good words, they will be followed by some positive actions. Although in big politics this is far from being the case. Here, and on the other hand, it is very important to understand, as I always say, the psychotype of such people as a narcissist. This is the classic type of this narcissist that Donald Trump personifies today. Maybe it's some ordinary life, it wouldn't matter. Yes, if it was a representative of some show business. There's a carload and a cartload of those in show business too, right? Here, but this narcissist is the most powerful man on the planet today in terms of power. He's the President of the United States in America. And so it's a force to be reckoned with, friend and foe alike. And whether it's the G7, whether it's the NATO summit, or whether it's all the conflicts that he's involved himself in, I mean the Russia-Ukraine issue, the Middle East issue, I mean Israel-Hamas.
Поэтому с этим приходится всем считаться, и друзьям, и врагам. И будь то G7, будь то саммит НАТО, или будь то все те конфликты, которые он себя вовлек, я имею в виду российско-украинскую тему, тему Ближнего Востока, я имею в виду Израиль, Хамас.
The 12-day war between Israel and Iran was another example of how he seeks to be present in every situation, often imposing his involvement without invitation. He expects everything to go his way, and if things go differently, he tries to maintain the appearance that he is not to blame for anything, but that he is sure to win. We hear stories about how he supposedly solved the conflict between Serbia and Kosovo. But where is the confirmation? Where is the peace agreement? Where is the document? He is also claimed to have settled disputes between Rwanda and Congo, between Afghanistan and India. But there are no meetings or signed agreements in sight. He is even demanding a Nobel Prize for this. Same with the conflict between Iran and Israel. Where is the document? Who signed what? There are no statements or treaties. In the end, it is clear that international law does not play a decisive role here. The law of force prevails, and today it is certainly on the side of the United States and Donald Trump personally.
И он решил, оказывается, войну между Ираном и Израилем точно так же. А какой документ? Натаньяху подписал с Али Хамени, какой-то документ, есть что-то такое. Поэтому, когда мы это все видим, мы понимаем, что здесь нет никакого международного права. Играет право силы. Да, право силы, оно сегодня, конечно, в первую очередь на стороне Соединенных Штатов Америки и лично Дональда Трампа.
So far, he has not really used this force anywhere, but has only used it a little in the Middle East, at the last moment, in the context of the conflict between Iran and Israel. Otherwise, he could not claim to have been on the sidelines and at the same time actively involved. He intervened, showed strength, and then quickly backed off, demonstrating, "Here I intervened, and everyone listened to me," both Benjamin Netanyahu and Ali Khamenei. And for this, in his opinion, he is once again worthy of the Nobel Prize, although there is no documentation. Everyone declared themselves winners: Trump, Netanyahu, Khamenei. Against the background of this contradictory, sometimes even comical situation, we are trying to find common sense for analytics. In assessing the summit, I try to distance myself from personal judgments. You already know my attitude to Democrats and Republicans, to Biden and Trump. I am critical of both sides. I'll try to give a clean, albeit subjective, analysis. Agreement is not necessary. This is just a view from my side.
Мое отношение к демократам и к республиканцам, и к Байдену, и к Трампу вы прекрасно знаете, довольно критично и к тому, и к другому. Вот. Поэтому я постараюсь дать чистую аналитику, как я ее вижу, да, субъективно. Со мной можно соглашаться, можно не соглашаться.
This is my subjective opinion. The NATO summit for Ukraine, if you look at it from its position, was positive, as was the G7 summit, because the external form was observed. The meeting took place and encouraging rhetoric was heard afterwards. But the most important thing is what we have not been shown. I think it goes along the lines of what I mentioned earlier. Donald Trump and the leaders of Europe seem to have gotten even closer, as everyone is trying to adjust to him and do his bidding. He said 5%, and this 5% has been secured, despite the fact that we are talking about implementation until 2035. As they say in Azerbaijan, either the padishah dies or the donkey dies. The main thing is that the decision has been made, and Trump can declare, "This is my victory." He talked about it in his previous cadence. He brought it to 2%, and now he is bringing it to 5%. This 5% directly concerns Ukraine, because we are talking about €1 trillion a year, according to experts. Without Ukraine, Europe's security system is impossible, especially considering that at the summit, there were statements from Rutte and other leaders that Europe must be prepared. In 5 years, Russia may attack.
$1 триллион евро в год, это как вот специалисты говорят, да? И однозначно без Украины система безопасности Европы, она невозможна. А тем более, если и Рютте, и все другие вот на этом саммите говорили о том, что надо готовиться, уже через 5 лет Россия может на нас напасть, да?
If we are talking about a 5-year horizon, it means that during this time Ukraine must be made sustainable to prevent an attack from Russia. This does not mean that the war will last 5 years, but it does reflect an understanding that when Russia claims a protracted conflict, It is important to make the protracted war unprofitable for it and Ukraine stronger. In more than 3 years, this conflict has demonstrated how rapidly the goals, objectives, and methods of warfare are changing. Today, there is less talk of tanks. The focus is on drones, artificial intelligence, and other advanced technologies. Given Europe's resources and capabilities, which are far superior to Russia's, this inspires cautious optimism. Notably, at the press conference, a female reporter, likely the same one who asked a question during the Oval Office scandal, asked the question again, and Trump seemed to greet her warmly, even asking personal questions. The Patriot discussion also sounded positively accented.
Сейчас она задала вопрос, и посмотрите, как он тепло ее принял, и спросил даже, личные вопросы задал. И тема Патриота, как будто бы она тоже позитивно прозвучала, да?
The negativity toward the Russian president has become obvious, and Trump is demonstrating it publicly. At the beginning of his presidency, the only one who matched him psychologically was the Russian president. Now everyone, European leaders and the president of Ukraine, has joined him. The impression is that Trump feels everyone praises him, wants to cooperate with him, and now he chooses the most favorable partner. Europe is certainly superior to Russia in terms of potential, which is why the G7 and NATO summits were outwardly successful. As for breakthrough solutions, we should not expect them. The NATO issue for Ukraine, as for others, is closed in the near future. And this is probably even for the best. NATO today differs little from the UN and looks like a military political bloc without real influence. Without US participation, NATO practically does not function, and NATO is first and foremost a military alliance. Who is ready to fight for Ukraine now? Nobody. When the issue of Article 5 was raised right on board the plane, it caused a storm of emotions, but everyone was calmed by the fact that the discussion took place in a relatively calm manner.
Посмотрите, когда был задан вопрос по поводу пятой графы на борту самолета, и посмотрите, какой всплеск эмоций это вызвало у всех, и все успокоились после того, как саммит прошел в более-менее приличной форме.
Donald Trump himself seems to have disavowed the topic. This begs the question, is Article 5 only about US defense, or is it not working at all? Then why the need for NATO? It makes sense when someone is willing to actually intercede, like Turkey for Azerbaijan, or the US for Israel. Israel doesn't need NATO for that reason, and Ukraine probably needs something similar. Now there is a collective support of Europe, but within it there are different countries. Some really want to help, feeling fear, others participate more as part of a common political game, and under the pretext of a possible Russian attack in 5 years. At the same time, we must not forget the political and economic component. The arms race has always brought a lot of money. This was the case in the Soviet Union. Defense enterprises, development of missiles, nuclear weapons, space exploration. All this provided a high standard of living for those who were part of the military-industrial complex.
Вот эти, я говорю, режимные заводы, эти все те, которые выпускали, да, эти ракеты, ядерное оружие, занимались космосом.
Funding was then at full throttle, as there was competition with the United States of America. In the United States, the defense budget was also a priority. The Pentagon alone receives about $1 trillion. And Europe, with a population of 450 million, is asking the United States, with its 340 million, to defend it against 140 million strong Russia. At the same time, Europe has huge financial resources, which means it has everything it needs to ensure its own security. And it seems to have started moving in that direction. Look at the activity your president is showing and how he's being received at the highest levels. He gets audiences at Buckingham Palace on a regular basis. Take note, at one event, they seated the two main guests, Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelenskyy, next to each other. The Queen sat next to Zelenskyy, and the King sat next to Trump, so that neither felt left out. Thus, the highest representatives of the country found themselves next to the main figures of the summit, emphasizing their status.
королева Голландии, Нидерландов, они разделились. Королева пошла, села с Зеленским, а король сел с Дональдом Трампом. То есть, чтобы не было обидно ни тому, ни другому. Да? То есть, высшее, так сказать, лицо этой страны сидело рядом с тобой. Да? Ну, обязательно с женой сидел или с мужем. Но именно так они и разделили. Потому что они главные были, так сказать, персонажами.
One of them is the most influential person on the planet, the head of a leading power, and the other is the one without whose participation and protection neither NATO, nor the EU, nor the G7, nor the unification of the Western world as a whole is possible. That is why President Zelensky has such a special personal attitude to him. For more than 3 years of war, he has managed to build competent communication and prove himself as a charismatic leader. He is as much a media character as Donald Trump, and he conducted his party no less spectacularly. Today, he is a regular at key events, not even a member of the G7 or NATO, sitting next to world leaders. This speaks to his importance and ability to keep up with the strongest. Trump's confrontation with Europe has a lot of ideological basis. Behind the scenes, Germany plays a special role, where the new chancellor shows a different position compared to Kim Starmer and Macron. Its opinion is taken into account in matters of financing, armaments, and everything necessary, even if not to the extent desired, but nevertheless the result is visible. To summarize, the NATO summit was held on a positive note, and I do not see any negative signals in it.
Такие страны, в первую очередь, в Европе, как Германия, потому что новый канцлер как будто бы отличается в своих подходах и от Кима Стармера, и от Макрона. Я хочу, чтобы вы понимали, да, вот противостояние Дональда Трампа с Европой в целом, оно еще базируется на идеологической основе. Да?
The political left has always been on good terms with the U.S. Democratic administration, supporting Obama and Biden. This caused a certain irritation to Trump, and he decided to zero in on everything that had been done before him. Judging by the results, he is succeeding. His position is being reckoned with. What his opponents think in their hearts is another question, but he understands it perfectly well too. Everyone is playing his own game. Trump with Europe, Europe with him, Europe with Zelensky, Zelensky with both America and Europe. It seems that the parties have found some kind of compromise that allows them to maintain political form within the G7, NATO, the EU, and other platforms where Ukraine's position now sounds clear. Ukraine cannot be pushed back because capitulation or unresolved situation will be the collapse of all these political institutions. This is disadvantageous to neither the US nor Trump personally, especially if we take into account that events are developing in his favor.
Всех этих политических институтов. Это не нужно ни Соединенным Штатам Америки, это не нужно лично Дональду Трампу, особенно учитывая, что вот как будто процессы идут так, как ему это надо.
The situation seems to be zeroing in, with everyone showing agreement and visual support. Even Kim Starmer voiced approval, and Kerry Starmer signed an agreement that, on close examination, appeared to be more favorable to the UK than to the US. Yet outwardly, it is being presented as a victory for Donald Trump. The same logic applies in the Middle East and other situations. Everyone is ready to declare a resounding victory, simply because Trump said so. Even at the NATO summit, he was congratulated on his victory in the war between Israel and Iran, although no one clarifies exactly what that victory is. But he calls it a success, and no one argues, because any objection turns into conflict, as it did in the Oval Office. So everyone prefers to say what he wants to hear in exchange for what they need to get. The example of Keir Starmer confirms this. He even seems to have surpassed Rutte himself in this matter. Rutte is the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands and now Secretary General. His praise was reminiscent of the days when Leonid Brezhnev was praised. Even in Russia today, they don't talk about the president as enthusiastically as Rutte did about Donald Trump. The conversation quickly descended to daddy, 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 and the whole thing looked comical. But Trump is enjoying it. He's enjoying the attention. If he just stays out of the way and is supportive, that's not a bad thing. And if he manages to get something useful from him, that's great. Europe has money, and the US has something to offer. In the end, it all comes down to financing. Europe will have to share with both America and Ukraine. To summarize, the processes are still developing in a positive way, and in fact, Europe is doomed to support Ukraine.
Можно предложить Европе, да, в этой ситуации. Поэтому в конечном итоге это упрется в вопрос денег, и Европе придется раскошеливаться и в сторону Америки, и в сторону той же Украины. Так что, резюмируя, в принципе, процессы идут пока что в позитивном направлении. Я не сомневаюсь, они также будут идти, потому что Европа просто обречена на поддержку Украины.
Thank you, Mr. Yunus, for your detailed and thorough account of the NATO summit. I and our viewers would also like to know your opinion on the latest statement by Turkish President Recep Erdogan. He said that during Trump's return from the summit, they had a conversation during which Trump allegedly expressed his willingness to come to the Ukraine-Russia meeting if Putin takes part in it. How do you take that? It sounds like a diplomatic excuse by Trump, because it is obvious that Putin's arrival at such a meeting is extremely unlikely. Or does this statement have ulterior motives? Perhaps it has to do with Erdogan's own interests. Today, many people seek to gain political points by participating in the solution of global problems, especially those that are causing anxiety around the world, such as the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. It is no coincidence that Donald Trump immediately decided to get involved in this process, even though no one invited him, neither the president of Russia nor the president of Ukraine. At the press conference, when a journalist asked a question about his promise to end the war in 24 hours, he admitted that it was said with irony and added that the conflict turned out to be much more complicated than he expected. Obviously, before making such statements, a deeper study of the region, its historical context, the centuries-long confrontation, and the religious and cultural roots of the conflict should have been undertaken. We should have consulted experts who understand the specifics of Eastern Europe, the split between the Russian and Ukrainian Orthodox churches, and many other factors. Without this, it is impossible to realize the scale of the tragedy when we are talking about thousands of deaths every week. Such sacrifices require understanding not only the consequences, but also the underlying causes. Trump treated the situation as if it were just another real estate transaction.
Ради чего сегодня происходят такие масштабные жертвы, да? И он этого не понимал, он думал, что это то же самое, что продавать недвижимость, да?
He had really thought it would be easier, just like you. Now it finally dawned on him. He had failed in this subject. In more than 3 years of war, already in its 4th year, many countries had gotten involved and managed to earn political capital, especially Turkey, thanks to its humanitarian initiatives, the grain agreement, the exchange of prisoners of war, and the first Istanbul meeting. Recently, the second round of talks in Istanbul also took place, albeit without a result, but the very fact that they were held there speaks volumes. The eyes of the world are focused there, because that is where the delegations cross paths, and everything seems to hint that if the Russian president goes there, Donald Trump will go there too. He was in the neighborhood, and it became an occasion for active discussion of the role of Turkey and President Erdogan personally. This strengthened his image, and he continues to develop this topic. Turkey's position is clear. The country is not directly involved in the conflict, but it is trying to become a significant mediator.
Поэтому он хочет усиливать эту тему. Поэтому позиция Турции, она понятна, потому что Турция напрямую в этот конфликт не вовлечена.
Turkey officially takes Ukraine's side in this conflict, a position that the Turkish president has repeatedly voiced on all international platforms, especially the Crimea platform. It supports the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, which was particularly evident during President Zelensky's recent visit to Turkey. At the same time, Ankara maintains pragmatic relations with Russia, despite the existence of serious contradictions. The latest sharp episode between the two sides occurred in Syria, where Turkey dealt a tangible blow to Moscow's interests. However, there is no mutual public criticism at the highest level, neither from Russia to Turkey, nor vice versa, but go down to a lower level and the flow of antagonism becomes visible. In Russia, anti-Turkish stories are actively broadcast on propaganda channels and among Z bloggers. Similar sentiments are found in Turkey itself.
Шоу там, выступления на всяких этих пропагандистских каналах у этих всех Z-блогеров. Точно такого же типа можно слышать и в той же Турции, да?
We must realize that in such situations, Turkey is not just a regional power, but a country that claims superpower status on a number of fronts. Although it is not a permanent member of the Security Council and does not possess nuclear weapons, its response to the war between Israel and Iran, as well as its participation in the prisoner exchanges, demonstrate the significance of its role. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Oman, Qatar, states that have managed to maintain a certain equidistance from the conflict, have been involved. From their point of view, this is not their war, and that is why they remain neutral. But where their direct interest is affected, they intervene openly. An example is the Syrian issue. Turkey is active in Idlib, and it is from there that it is playing its strategic game, for which it has been preparing for years. It should be recalled that since 2015, Turkey and Russia's relations have been strained after the incident with the fighter jet, and for 6 months the sides have been in a tough confrontation. Then they seemed to restore relations, but as a result, Russia was pushed out, first from the Caucasus, then from Syria. In many areas, it is impossible to say that Moscow is satisfied with Ankara's policy. On the other hand, where should it fly to? The Russian president is not going to Brazil for the BRICS summit because the country is a signatory to the Rome Statute and a member of the International Criminal Court. And the actions of the warrant, although interpreted differently, are formally extended, and Brazil has not provided the necessary guarantees. Turkey did not sign this document, does not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC, and, as a guarantor country, could provide security. Therefore, if the Russian president decided to make an international trip, Turkey is one of the possible options. Whether he needs it is another matter. President Zelensky's tactics after the Oval Office scandal proved to be accurate. He began diplomatically playing along with Trump in the negotiations, realizing that in the end it would be Putin who would refuse to participate. Confrontation with Trump was disadvantageous to him. As a result, Trump himself was forced to make tough statements against Moscow at the NATO summit. Moscow, as you can see, has never publicly criticized Donald Trump. In the West, they criticize anyone, but not him. And Trump himself does not speak too harshly against Russia, although he allows his supporters, Rubio or Lindsey Graham, to do so more harshly. He plays the role of good cop and bad cop at the same time, as if leaving room for future negotiations. But these are illusions. There are and will be no negotiations at the highest level because there has been no capitulation by either side. And without capitulation, either someone has to demonstrate strength or admit defeat. Trump doesn't want to demonstrate force, and that's why there is no meeting between him, Putin, and Zelensky. Just meeting like that is pointless. Such a meeting should lead to a concrete result, such as a ceasefire. They seem to have been preparing for such a scenario, but the Russian president apparently believes that he has not yet gotten everything he hoped for and hopes to reap additional benefits. From the very beginning of the war, he probably believed that the West would fail to unite.
Он еще не все получил, и он может еще что-то получить в этой ситуации. Он рассчитывал на то еще, начиная эту войну, наверняка рассчитывал на то, что Запад все-таки не консолидируется.
He expects to outsit everyone. He assumed that Donald Trump would take a tougher stance on Ukraine and Europe and would be able to take advantage of this. However, as you can see, all his bets have failed. He has not yet achieved any significant results. His main focus remains on the military component. For some reason, he is confident that he will be able to advance and achieve his goals despite colossal losses. It is said that these sacrifices do not matter to him. Perhaps they do for him personally, but on the scale of the Russian economy, ideology, and political stability, they will inevitably give a crack. This is similar to the situation with Iran, when each side, Iran, Israel, the US, claimed victory. But in reality, it was Iran that turned out to be the loser, and this became the starting point for a future political crisis. Israel did not win unconditionally, and the US was left out of the final outcome. But they did not lose. All this demonstrates how difficult it is to assess the outcome unambiguously if there is no strategic advantage for either side. Realizing all this, we should take into account how different politicians think. Turkey's president has maintained a consistent and open stance on Ukraine since the war began. He remains within the framework of the common Western doctrine of support as a NATO member. At the same time, he emphasizes the humanitarian component, which reinforces his status as a regional leader and a global player to be reckoned with. It is through this balanced position that he seeks to increase his country's influence. However, as of today, I do not see any real prerequisites for a concrete meeting. One last question in the context of the NATO summit. Do you think that approaches can change? You have already noted that Trump should not be expected to make any radical or breakthrough decisions. But is there still a possibility of some shifts toward Ukraine? Could he take the model of the previous president as a basis, but with the difference that he will provide Ukraine with military aid? Or will he distance himself from both Russia and Ukraine at the same time, avoiding involvement in the war itself? As far as I understand, everything will go through Europe, through specific countries, and from there it will be re-exported to Ukraine. This is one of the possible ways. Plus, the personal agreements that President Zelenskyy and Donald Trump reached today are important. Such meetings don't just happen, especially at the level of such figures. If Trump didn't want to, he would have found a way to avoid this meeting, especially given his character. He has already demonstrated that he can walk out of negotiations, cause a scandal, and cut off dialogue. If he went to the meeting, it means he has his own calculations. He realizes that Zelenskyy is a serious and difficult partner. People with a personality type like Trump's have a clear pattern of behavior. They respect and reckon only with those who show strength and can hold a blow. That is why personal contact is crucial for him.
Такой психотипаж, который есть у Дональда Трампа, я хочу, чтобы вы понимали, это не только он такой, по жизни такие люди, вот если вы их увидите, они считаются только с теми людьми, которые крепкий орешек, у которых есть сила.
He has the charisma of a strong-willed leader. It is not without reason that he emphasizes that he likes figures like Erdogan, Putin, Xi Jinping, leaders with an authoritarian style. He has even called Kim Jong-un a sympathetic character and said he would like the American people to listen to him, as the North Koreans listen to their leader. He likes strong, unbending people. Zelenskyy is the only person in the Oval Office who has shown such toughness. But Zelenskyy doesn't have the resource that others have, like Cyrus Starmer, who has access to finance, weapons, and a nuclear arsenal. So Starmer, as Prime Minister of the UK, doesn't need a show of toughness. Trump understands that. Likewise, he understands who Emmanuel Macron is as President of France, and who Recep Erdogan is as leader of a country with one of NATO's largest armies, with real power to influence the situation in the Middle East.
Президент Эрдоган. Это вторая армия НАТО. И это человек, который там на Ближнем Востоке может сделать огромное количество и плохо для него, и хорошо для него.
He has held power for 20 years and has done so, ironically, through democratic elections, whether anyone likes it or not. That's why Trump calls him his friend and compliments him. When we observe this kind of rhetoric, the psychotype of Donald Trump becomes clearer. He needs to be adapted to, and it appears that the North Atlantic Alliance and its leaders have already done so. Everything reminds of the adjustment in a marriage of convenience, not by love, but through an arrangement when people are brought together by common interests. At first, it may lead to conflicts and rupture, but sometimes such alliances are successful. It doesn't take long for the West, NATO, the EU, and the G7 to adapt even to a complex type like Donald Trump. You can see that they have found an approach rather quickly.
Родственники их там свели, или знакомые как-то свели, ну, общие интересы какие-то совпали. А потом идет притирка. Потом идет, притирка может довести до того, что это конфликт, они разбежались. А бывает иногда вот притирка так тихо-тихо-тихо прошло, и как будто бы срослось, все получится. А для Запада, для НАТО, для Евросоюза, для G7 много не нужно времени для того, чтобы притереться даже к такому сложному психотипажу, который сегодня олицетворяет Дональд Трамп. И вроде бы, как будто, видите, они быстро приноровились к этому.
Ukraine's problem today is Ukraine itself, or more precisely, the figure of President Zelensky. The country continues to resist, and Zelensky himself is a leader who cannot be sold out by any side. Everyone has to reckon with this, regardless of their sympathies. It may not suit Donald Trump or many European leaders, but Zelensky realizes his political power and broadcasts it. Whether you like it or not, you have to reckon with me. I was elected by the people. It is important to maintain public support inside the country, and this is possible as long as the mobilization mood of society remains. Recently, however, there has been an increasing number of throw-ins, including dubious opinion polls, which in fact are aimed at internal undermining. Those who are trying to sway the situation from within, journalists, bloggers, sofa experts, are playing against the statehood. In times of war, democracy in the classical sense does not work. It requires a rigid vertical of power, centralism, martial law, and unity of command. In conditions of open conflict, any attempts at political activity or polls assessing the popularity of the authorities look like undermining defense capabilities and public unity. How many times, Igor, I have said it on the air. I have taken a 5-year moratorium on participating in public and political activities since September 27, 2020. To this day, I am not doing it. I am not interested in it. And look what results we have achieved. The war seems to be over, but as I warned, the borders are closed, and now the military conflict is unfolding off our shores. Imagine if the borders had been open all these years, what it could have led to. This is important to understand. It is one thing to fight for power and aspire to the chair without thinking about the consequences for the motherland. Then a person is a scoundrel. But if you talk about the motherland sincerely, without pathos, then you have to sacrifice something, including ambitions. Why are your politicians not ready to make such sacrifices? Were the lessons of 2014 not enough? Wasn't 2008 enough for Georgia? I am a politician with 30 years of experience, a former member of the government. I care about the fate of Azerbaijan. I will do my utmost to make sure that such a thing does not happen again. And as you can see, we are succeeding. And you again have someone from inside raising the same destructive topics. There are forces in the West that do not agree with the rigid position of your political leadership. And if you can't change the situation from the outside, then they are trying to influence from within. Look at Iran. Everyone claims victory, but in reality, a political crisis is beginning. This is an important point worth noting. A violent dismantling of power could lead to chaos, which would hit not only Iran, but also the US, Israel, and US allies in the Arab monarchies. Such a situation could no longer be controlled, because Iran is not Syria. It is 90 million people, many confessions and nationalities, Azerbaijanis, Persians, Baluchis, Arabs, Kurds. If the process goes on, it will be extremely difficult to stop it. And the region is a strategic one. The Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, about 70% of the world's energy resources pass through this point. In case of destabilization, oil prices may soar to $150 to $200 per barrel. Such a scenario is disadvantageous to no one, neither the West nor China.
И это никому не нужно, это и Китаю в том числе не нужно.
It may seem that Russia benefits from this situation in the short term, but in the long run it has already gone through the trials of the North Caucasus and the two Chechen wars, and it certainly does not need a repeat of such a scenario. My native Azerbaijan does not need it either. As for Donald Trump's actions, it was a well-thought-out decision. He conducted an operation. He went in, struck a blow, and came out. The very way of pitching is a separate issue. No one won there in the classical sense. But the fact is that the result was achieved. The enemy was pushed back. Was it completely destroyed? Most likely not. Otherwise, it would have been demonstrated already. Perhaps they will show it later. But if there is a new threat, the bombing will be repeated. As things stand, Iran will not get a nuclear weapon, as long as Donald Trump stays in the game and Benjamin Netanyahu is in power in Israel. Everything that has happened since October 7th and over the past 20 months has been played out as a single game, a joint strategy in which both sides acted in concert. Ali Khamenei also played a role. Remember the first time there was a massive launch, some 350 rockets toward Israel, and warnings were sent in advance, with the result that not a single rocket reached its target. The same logic was seen in the strike on the US base in Qatar, a country that is traditionally friendly to Iran, and in many ways supports it. The missiles were launched through Qatari airspace, but were announced in advance, thus avoiding casualties. It is hard to call this a war or an act of retaliation. The Americans do not warn when they launch strikes that B-2s are flying and dropping bombs. Israel also does not put anyone on notice. And Iran warns and then declares it a victory. Against this backdrop, you can see how all three figures, Trump, Netanyahu, and Khamenei, are trying to capitalize on what is happening as much as possible. But it is Donald Trump who is in the most advantageous position. He has actively engaged in the process and can now declare himself the winner. Had he not done so, he would not have been able to take the position of authorship and say to Netanyahu, "I organized all of this." At first, he denied any involvement. Then he said he was coordinating with Netanyahu, though still claimed the US wasn't involved. But the bombing changed that. He entered the conflict, then quickly exited, declaring victory. But is it really a win? Just like in the cases of Serbia and Kosovo, Pakistan and India, Congo and Rwanda, loud in words, but in reality, it's all a matter of interpretation.
И теперь ты говоришь, ты победитель в этой ситуации. Да? Ты такой же победитель, как между Сербией и Косово, и между Пакистаном и Индией, и так же, как в Конго и в Руанде. Да?
Why do you want to make this claim? For the sake of a Nobel Prize. As of today, the only real topic for which he could get it is the resolution of the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, which he has nothing to do with. He could have intervened if Azerbaijan had given its consent, if the country itself wanted someone to get international recognition at its expense. But for that, it would have to make serious efforts to convince the US and the political establishment to abandon the Armenian-centric position, to achieve the repeal of the 907th Amendment of the Congress directed against Azerbaijan, and many other things. Only then, perhaps, with a change in the political climate in Armenia and the reform of its constitution, could it be said that he really contributed to the solution of this problem? What exactly is there to give such an award for? Why do we need a third participant in this topic? No one can seriously imagine that Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelenskyy will receive the Nobel Prize together on the Russian-Ukrainian issue. Similarly, it is impossible to imagine that Ali Khamenei and Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the subject of an international criminal court warrant, will receive the award together with Donald Trump. This is unrealistic. In the case of India and Pakistan, nothing of the sort happened at all, and Trump had nothing to do with the resolution of the conflict. No matter how much he claimed otherwise, the issue was resolved differently, thanks to China standing behind Pakistan and Turkey, which also supported him. Trump's phone calls played no role. Victory in the air remained with Pakistan, and all the media hype with watermelons under the fly is just an excuse for buzzwords. You don't get awards for that. It's all a game. What we are witnessing requires careful and sober analysis.
Вот оно в реале, да, это надо уметь читать, надо уметь правильно к этому анализировать.
Watching the Israeli and Iranian media today, it is obvious that there is massive propaganda on both sides. Netanyahu's opponents say one thing, his supporters say something completely different. In Iran, it is the same picture, but the reality is this: 46 years of anti-Israel and anti-American rhetoric has had serious consequences for the country. Hezbollah and Hamas have been defeated. The country's airspace has effectively become a backyard. Air defenses have been destroyed. Most launchers and ballistic missiles have been destroyed. Nuclear infrastructure, including facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, have been hit. The damage was not complete, but it was severe. Not a single American soldier was killed. There were casualties in Israel, but if you compare the scale of destruction and losses, the difference is obvious. Thanks to the actions of Donald Trump and his strategy, there was no further escalation, because the goal was not total destruction, but the launch of a political crisis inside Iran. It is this crisis, if it develops, that could eventually lead to a scenario similar to the Syrian one.
Цель была именно такая, чтобы дать старт политическому кризису в Иране. Потому что политический кризис в Иране, он в конечном итоге может привести к ситуации, похожей, как в Сирии.
This scenario of a change of power in Iran has apparently already been set in motion. The lessons of the Arab revolutions, especially the Arab Spring and the subsequent chaos in Libya, point to this. In Syria, the situation worsened only after Russia's intervention. If we create an internal political crisis and competently support it from the outside, such opportunities exist today. There are many Iranians abroad who oppose the regime, and many inside the country who do not support the clergy's rule. It is no coincidence that Israeli intelligence first of all eliminates not only nuclear specialists, but also those who are connected with Khomeini's ideological legacy and support Ali Khamenei, i.e., representatives of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Leaders like Pesheshkian or Rouhani, on the other hand, are not touched. All this gives the impression that the crisis is being initiated in a precise and calibrated manner.
И как будто бы, я так понимаю, вот именно таким образом этот политический кризис начнется.
It's a long process and no one is in much of a hurry. Donald Trump got what he wanted. Netanyahu has strengthened his position and may be planning early parliamentary elections to capitalize on the political upsurge. The war in Gaza continues, and in such conflicts, hurrah patriotism becomes a tool to consolidate society around power. It's a universal pattern, whether it's Iran, the US, or Israel. Everything that is happening is a game. In the Middle East, it is a game. In the Russian-Ukrainian issue, it is a game. It is important to understand this and play your game. Politics is a chess field, even if we are talking about war. Whether it is the First or the Second World War, or those processes that may lead to the Third. Today there are no clear rules. The world operates on the principle of the jungle, and the countdown of this era began in August 2008 with the aggression against Georgia.
Точка отсчета, знаете, когда началась, если так хотите? Это 2008 год, августовская агрессия против Грузии.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, we witnessed bloodshed in Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazia, the Tskhinvali region, and Transnistria. These conflicts were perceived as a natural consequence of the collapse of the empire and were formally frozen. However, the situation changed in 2008 after the Russian president's Munich speech, in which he declared the need to reformat the world order and create a new Yalta. He was not heard, and he moved to active actions. It was then that the era of the law of the jungle began in international relations. The right of force supplanted the power of law. This principle has remained dominant ever since. Today we see how international law does not work. Russia violates it with regard to Ukraine, and in response accuses Israel of violating the same norms in strikes on Iran. Israel, citing the right of self-defense, strikes and receives support. All this confirms that the rules once enshrined in international treaties are gradually losing force. Just as Ukraine has the right to defend itself, so does my native Azerbaijan. But when one starts to equate victim and aggressor, it becomes clear that one can act only from a position of strength. If Russia strikes the territory of Ukraine, Ukraine has the right to respond in the same way. Why is it forbidden to do so? All sides are hiding behind international law. They talk about referendums, UN documents, and everyone interprets the norms in their favor. The Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, the French, and the British. In the end, it is not the right that wins, but force. Therefore, Ukrainians accumulate strength. You have everything for that. Industrial base left from the Soviet times, experience, resources, and if you even decide to restore nuclear potential, no one will be able to stop you.
Если вы даже пойдете на восстановление вашего ядерного арсенала, никто вам не скажет не делайте это.
Iran pursued nuclear capabilities but faced strong opposition. Nuclear weapons today are effectively unusable. Nations like Russia or Israel are restrained from using them. Iran's program was curbed to prevent escalation. In South Asia, Pakistan was allowed nukes to counterbalance India. Similarly, North Korea plays into China's strategy to pressure the US and its allies, prompting American military presence for balance. A similar strategic balance may be essential for you. Like Israel, whose unacknowledged arsenal remains an open secret, you need not confirm possession. Just act on the reality that force may be the only path to reclaim your territories.
Один еврей сегодня признал в том, что у Израиля есть это ядерное оружие, а там как минимум 50 ядерных боеголовок. Никто же это не признается, и вам это не надо признаваться. Точно так же, как все остальное, все, что вы будете делать. Но просто знайте, вы свои земли можете вернуть только военным путем.
If a territory was lost with blood, it can be regained only with blood. My native Azerbaijan has realized this and is following this path today. We do not violate international law and do not call for its violation. Crimea is your land. Donbass is also your land. If you want them back, there is no other way but military. No politician in the world will give it to you voluntarily. In life, only cheese in a mousetrap is free. This is what you should strive for and prepare for. Instead of political strife within the country, you need to focus on militarization. Europe, bourgeois, fed up and affluent, uses fear as a deterrent. Under this pretext, they make money, do business. They buy F-35s, air defense systems, missiles, whatever from the Americans. But under the cover of fear, they create security. Russia will not attack until it overcomes Ukraine. It will not be able to swallow Ukraine. It will choke on it. The sooner this becomes obvious, the sooner this tragedy, these daily bombings and suffering, will end. The main thing is to become stronger. Believe me, sooner or later the holiday will come to your street. This is not pathos, I really believe in it. I have gone through it myself, my country, my Azerbaijan has gone through it. If we, a small nation in a complex geography, surrounded by Russia and Iran, our historical adversaries, were able to resist, so will you. We have been divided, Armenia has been added, with France and the United States behind it. But we have stood our ground, passed this way with our heads held high. It took us time, experience, refusal of illusions. We wised up, and I urge you to do the same, to take off the rose-colored glasses, to be sober and strong. Unfortunately, I see how a lot of things are destroying from within. Sometimes I even want to say it harshly and directly. These are the real enemies of the Ukrainian people. He is a citizen of Ukraine. He has a Ukrainian passport. He is not an Azerbaijani like me. And do you really think that in such a situation someone can take the chair and stay there for a long time? What are you thinking about? What are you guided by? You finally have a strong and responsible president. You were able to consolidate and start resistance. Europe, albeit late, has woken up. Can't you see that you are being undermined from within? If you continue to write everything off on democracy and listen to this stream of meaningless talk, which is thrown in by various pseudo-experts and grant makers all over Europe, you risk losing. They don't care about the fate of Ukraine. They already betrayed once in 2014 when they forced them to sign the Minsk agreements. With whom? With the same people with whom they then did business, Moscow, and now they want to do the same. But if your president, his team, and your army are holding the line, why on earth would anyone behind the scenes take the moral authority to revise all this? They take polls, they take public opinion, and the bottom line remains the same.
Им наплевать сегодня на Украину. Неужели вы не понимаете вот этим на Западе? Это они же были в 2014 году, которые вас предали, заставили эти Минские соглашения подписать. С кем? И с кем они деньги делали? С той же Москвой. И они сегодня хотят это сделать. Если ваш президент, его команда и армия ваша не позволяет это делать, по какому моральному праву какие-то политики закулисно собираются это делать? Опрос общественного мнения проводят. И так далее.
Do you really think Putin just keeps repeating the thesis of illegitimacy over and over again? And you also play along with this rhetoric. On the contrary, you should take an example from rigid political models. You need centralism under martial law. You have a war going on. The only reason Donald Trump counts with you today is because this president is in office. If one of the previous presidents had been in office, the Istanbul Accords would have been signed long ago, and you would not have seen Crimea or Donbass for the next half a century, until there is internal consolidation, as in Azerbaijan, until you reconsider your approach, create an army, find your own strategic ally, you will not start advancing. But you already have everything you need. Moreover, Europe, driven by fear, has become active. Use this. Play on the differences between the US and Europe. Let everyone realize that if Ukraine falls, they will come after it. Europe has money, resources, technology. Let them buy for you everything you need from the Americans. And it is not necessary to do everything publicly. And all those who still have a Russian passport, eliminate them from key positions. All those who left Russia and call themselves oppositionists, as well as those associated with them, do not realize that Ukraine is fighting for its existence. I am tired of repeating this, day after day, non-stop. Forgive my emotions, but I am speaking frankly. Against the background of all the discussions, bombings continue. Dozens of people were killed in Dnipro, earlier in Kyiv. This will not stop. This is the reality of war. To withstand, you need not only weapons, but also a society ready to resist. And when someone comes out and says that the majority wants to end the war at any cost, and only the minority wants to continue fighting, the question arises, who are you playing along with? The president of Russia? Are you questioning the legitimacy of your own president? Are you proposing to negotiate with a parliament with parties supposedly capable of finding a compromise? This is not a time for compromise. Where is the position of the security service? Why is this allowed?
Вы подыгрываете кому? Президенту России? О том, что у вас президент нелегитимный? И вам нужно договариваться с парламентом, а в парламенте есть какие-то политические партии и так далее и тому подобное? Куда смотрит служба безопасности? Куда смотрит служба безопасности?
Господин Юнус, большое вам спасибо за искренность.